Organic skin, black girl magic dripping. Yeah, she's on a mission, keeping our culture lifted. Now you can watch and listen. Tammi Mac, oh, what show is that? It's the Tammi Mac Show on Fox Soul.
Tammi Mac, Tammi Mac, yeah, ooh that, Tammi Mac, hey, so you know this Tammi Mac, hey, Tammi Mac.
Welcome to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. I am Tammi Mac. Good evening, everybody. We have all heard the saying, home is where the heart is. Or if you let Gil Scott-Heron tell it, home is where the hatred is. But where do all these emotions go when there is no home? According to the National Institute of Health, homelessness has been a national issue in the United States since the 1870s. A troubling trend we see today is not just homelessness, but child homelessness. So tonight we are having a very necessary conversation about child homelessness and more. Please welcome Dr. Gigi El Bayoumi. Hi, Dr. Gigi.
Hi.
Dr. Shauna Charles. Hi, Dr. Charles.
Hello.
And the executive director of Upward Bound House, Christine Glasgow. Hello, Christine.
Hi, thank you.
I'd like to start by asking, why should Black people care about child homelessness?
Because any society that is a society that is just and humane should care about its children, its elderly, its disabled, but our most vulnerable citizens are children. That is a mark of how advanced a society is. It's not how much money, how many, what the number of planes, fighter jets, or any of that. It is how we treat children.
Dr. Shauna?
Just like Dr. Gigi said, the children are, they're our future. And when we look at our children, it's not just about our children, it's also about what their families are experiencing, because children are dependent on their parents. And so when their parents are experiencing any type of crises or issues, then they are impacted also by that. So it also tells us a benchmark, not only are we for our children, but where we are also for our families who are out here trying to make it.
Christine, why should Black people care about child homelessness?
Black people should care for very many reasons, for all the reasons that have been stated, but also because we are disproportionately affected by homelessness. Black people make up 13% of the population in the US, and we make up 40% of the homeless population. That disproportionality is wrong. Something is wrong. So that's why we should care about it. And as far as our children go, like Dr. Charles just mentioned, they're the future. So if we are not taking care of our future, what's to say that our legacy and our heritage is going to continue? So it goes beyond just the day-to-day economic realities of being poor. And also we know that homelessness really affects children differently than it affects adults. For children, it actually stunts developmental growth in the brain. And so what we are doing in not paying attention to homelessness in our communities is that we are raising children who are really growing up with deficiencies that could otherwise be addressed. So we should really all be all in when it comes to homelessness, in the Black community.
You say that Black people should care because it disproportionately affects us. Why is that?
Oh, if I could jump in, I'll give you a very specific example. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. So let's talk about the history here. There is a place in DC called Berry Farm. It's in Anacostia, which is east of the Anacostia River. And after the Emancipation Proclamation, the freedmen were given 400 acres. And those 400 acres, they transformed into a farming community, very successful farming community. And after they would till the fields, they would actually walk by lantern light to where Howard University is, and they actually built Howard University. And at its heyday, 1 in 4 people attended Howard University. Now 1 in 4 are in the prison system. So the structural racism, including the Jim Crow laws that we talk about, which have really, I think we should call it like it is. This is an apartheid system, right? Where people are segregated, the redlining that has happened, all of the legal systematic racism by laws, by policy, have caused extreme poverty, have disproportionately impacted communities of color, but specifically African Americans, because of the legacy of slavery 400 years. And that's impacted everything from education to food to homes to all of it.
Wow. Dr. Shauna, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, Dr. Gigi said, it's just been systemic from the beginning. We even just see it, today in our reality with our election. We are in a divided nation today, and they are still trying to hold us back or have rules or reins around us. And so, it is just something that's not easily broken, but it is definitely something that we have to fix, or we have to change, and we have to change it for our children, because they are extremely impacted, not just emotionally, but psychologically, physically, mentally. It impacts them holistically, and it really needs to be looked at and dealt with through policy. And we have to realize how important policy is. That is where decisions are being made, and that is where we can make the changes. It is through policy and grassroots efforts.
So, Christine, you mentioned that children being homeless has a different effect. And so I wonder if maybe Dr. Gigi, you can talk about how specifically how children are affected differently than adults when they are homeless.
Sure. Well, let's start off with the mother before she even gets pregnant, and if she's homeless. Remember that what her frame of mind is, what her nutritional status is, what her stress level is before she even becomes pregnant is important. We're now learning a lot about fetal development in the womb and how these things really impact brain development, among other things. So you bring a child into this world who is homeless or home insecure or couch surfing, all of the things that come along with that, including the nutritional piece, the stimulation piece, the sleep that's disrupted. And what happens? Well, we know that children's brains, develop by being stimulated. We know that the number of words that children hear impact their vocabulary, impact their brain growth. Children express distress differently, and that can manifest in behavioral issues. I think one thing that, we as a society have to realize is that we can prevent these issues and tackle them now, or we can pay, if some people care about the economics of this, we can pay a much heavier price later. When kids act out in school, when people end up not doing well, or there are behavioral issues, or, the education is not there, or end up sadly in our, prison pipeline, that impacts, as Dr. Charles was mentioning, not just that individual child and their potential, which is really the criminal part, not being able to reach their potential, but the family and the community and the society as a whole.
Dr. Shauna, Dr. Gigi mentioned the mother, and if the mother is homeless, her stress level, her nutrition level, and it immediately made me think of how what the pregnant Black women's mortality rate, how we've had to deal with that within the last few years. Is that something that affects the children as well?
Oh, absolutely. Because remember, when you're in the womb, you feel exactly what your mother feels. You feel the stress, you feel the pain, you feel the hunger, you feel the happiness, you feel the joy. And now that it's even brought to the forefront about what the crises are that we are experiencing as Black women and how we are dying, having babies, of course we think about that. You cannot help but to think about that. And if you're stressed about it or you're physiologically responding to that, your baby is also feeling that. It doesn't go away. It's really one accord. So it is very important for mothers to relax and to understand what's going on, and to understand that their children do feel what's going on inside of them, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally. I'm all about holistically. You don't have one without the other. And we have to understand that as we move forward.
And we're going to continue to understand this as we move forward on the Tammi Mac Late Show. We're having a conversation today about child homelessness. So don't you go anywhere. Come right back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Fox Soul presents.
Meth, this was my first ever episode of Established, and I'm so glad that I was able to do this with you.
Established with Angela Yee.
I don't even like putting business out there like that. You're gonna have a bunch of people say, what? No investment, blah, blah.
I know you don't like putting your business out there, period. That's why I appreciate this conversation.
Every Thursday.
I was trying to avoid this. At night, I throw on the cape and cowl and fight crime. This is why you all can sleep safely at night, because Method Man is on the job. He is not just an MC. He is also a crime fighter.
The coronavirus has affected the African American community in many ways, including a drastic drop in blood donations. This is the time to take care of one another, and blood transfusions from healthy African American donors can be a life-saving treatment for patients with sickle cell disease or cancer. The American Red Cross adheres to the highest standards of safety and infection control and urges you to come out to donate. Please, make an appointment today at redcrossblood.org.
Gangs and narcotics, robbery, homicide. Like it's the end of days.
People are in danger. We're gonna do this thing together. No more games. This ends now. Let's go. You know, you could get yourself killed. You do what you gotta do.
You blew up the port of LA.
It's one vote in the van.
LA's finest, Mondays on Fox, or anytime on demand or Fox Now.
Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Tonight, we're talking about child homelessness. If you want more of this content, it's easy to get it. Just log on to foxsoul.tv, or you can download our Fox Soul app, or you can go to Fox Now, Fire TV, Zumo, Tubi, Roku. We're on caffeine.tv. We're on Apple TV. And if you want to chat with us live, because this is live, you can chat with us on YouTube right now. So chat with us. We chat back. I'm talking to Dr. Shauna, Dr. Gigi, and Christine about child homelessness. So according to the Children's Defense Fund, 5.9 million children live in families with worst case housing needs in their with worst case housing needs. So is there enough help for struggling families out here today?
No. That's a simple answer. I think that what is sad is that when you're talking about shelters, I remember one of my patients, I was, early on in my career, I'm like, why don't you go to a homeless shelter? And she said, are you kidding? Those are some of the most dangerous places. There are lots of people who are mentally ill, first of all, number one, and people who are not necessarily taking their medications. There are weapons, sometimes there are rats, so the housing is inadequate and can be dangerous. And furthermore, I think that there is a lot of shaming of homeless people, as though it is their moral failing to find themselves in that situation. And so in many ways, we do a disservice as a society for people who are finding themselves without shelter.
You know, it's interesting you bring up the word shaming because yesterday we did a show on mental health and mental illness, and the word shame kept coming up. Have we become a nation of just shaming, like a nation of shame, no matter what our situation or circumstance is? It's a really sad thing, I think. Christine.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is it's also cultural. You know, we talking about mental health. We know that in communities of color, these are not topics we talk about freely. It's the same thing with homelessness. You know, you tend to blame the mother because she is, you know, the careless mother. You know, why is she homeless? Why is she in a domestic violence situation? Why is it that you know, she can't make ends meet? Most homeless families are headed by a single mother. 93% of the families that are homeless in Los Angeles County are led by single mothers. So there's a connection right there when you see that there's no social fabric, there is no support system. So what happens, to your point about, you know, is there help? There's help and then there's no help. And there's no help in the sense that the safety net has really disappeared. You know, once upon a time, when you were homeless in this country, you had access to immediate shelter as a family. So you would get a motel immediately so that you wouldn't be sleeping in the streets. And then in the short term, you'd get a voucher, you'd get a housing voucher. What we know today we call Section 8, right? You'd get a Section 8 voucher. It was temporary in the sense that when you got back on your feet, you would surrender the Section 8 certificate and then continue living your life so that another family could use that, right? But that has all gone away.
What happened?
Well, over time, back to Dr. Shauna's point about policy, we have had people in government who have chipped at that safety net as time went along. Why? Because it was no longer a priority to help those who are less fortunate. So it's our tax dollars, you know, the pie is only so big. And as the interests get more and more pronounced, the people with less voice lose a piece of that pie. So when the defense contractors, when the insurance companies, when, you know, all the people show up and are getting tax breaks and they're getting subsidies, the tobacco industry, I mean, all the farmers, everybody's getting a subsidy from the government. And at some point, we can only print so much money. And then, so what happens is we start chipping away from these safety net programs. And what happens is we end up with situations where you're one paycheck away from becoming homeless, because the minute you fall sick, the minute your hours are reduced at work, you can't pay that rent anymore.
Yeah. The National Alliance to End Homelessness reports Black people are 13% of the United States population, but make up for 50% of homeless families with children. What can we attribute to that disparity, Dr. Shauna?
Well, you know, a lot of it also goes to, most of us are frontline workers. We work at minimum wage. And, you know, I did some research today and I was looking at the rent, thinking about housing insecurity, because housing insecurity and food insecurity, those are the number one drivers towards homelessness and fear for people and for families. And the average one bedroom in Los Angeles, one bedroom is over $2,000. Some people aren't even bringing that home monthly. So trying to make your ends meet, trying to feed your family, and trying to maintain and pay your rent, it's putting people out on the street every day. And it's difficult.
I would add the gentrification here in DC. We've seen huge changes. And so, for example, one of the housing projects that we're working with at the Rodham Institute has actually, back in the day when it was sort of locally owned, people were really well taken care of. Then a corporation took over. So what the tactics are, they're moving families from 3 bedrooms to, let's say, 2 bedrooms with 8 people. So they keep doing that. They don't, turn on the air conditioner in the summer or the heat in the winter. There's mold. So they force people out in other ways. Or, for example, with COVID, there's a place for kids to play downstairs. They put up security guards so that if the kids go downstairs to play, they will actually get a ticket, and that could get them kicked out of the housing development.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So that's another thing that I think has accelerated this problem. And of course, COVID, which has really just made things much, much worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we were already struggling before COVID, in the sense that we were paying close to between 50 and 60% of our income was going towards rent. That was before COVID, right? And which means that there's less money left for transportation, for food, for healthcare, for clothing. And like Dr. Shauna pointed out, most of our folks are working in low-paying jobs, right? The majority of Black people who are of a certain income level are working low-income minimum wage jobs. And what did COVID do to that? It shut that down overnight. So hospitality was gone, food service was gone, healthcare was gone. We were doing a lot of, in-home care, where you're caring for people in their homes or in places like that, gone. So all of a sudden, that income that was supporting us is no longer there. And we are really bracing for what's going to happen when all these moratoriums get lifted, because we know full well that most of those folks were not paying the rent during that time.
Not to mention that when you're looking at, for example, in Washington, D.C., 84% of the deaths from COVID are in Black people. So what does that do to the household? What does that do to the mental health? I mean, it is estimated now that 1 in 3 Black people in the country know somebody who's died of COVID. So this is, there were always disparities. This just kind of has taken it to the next level.
Is there a different set of resources for families who are experiencing poverty and are perhaps on the verge of homelessness?
I think that's where we are falling short, to be honest with you, Tammi. I think that we are not doing enough prevention work. We are not going upstream and figuring out how we can close the front door to homelessness. So we are reacting to homelessness. So we are letting folks basically escalate into a situation where they're living on the streets, and then now we're doing what we need to do. Whereas we know
proactive, we're being reactive.
Exactly. We know the vulnerable families. We know, and we know that from many points of entry. We know that from the school system, because at school it's very easy to tell kids who are living in precarious situations. They wear the same clothes over and over again. You can tell they've not showered sometimes. You can tell they're hungry all the time. There are all these indicators. So the school system is one place we can do that. We know of the court system. Anytime we file for unlawful detainers, those are families that we can still, even though it's in the court system, we can still intervene and do some proactive work there before they actually become homeless.
Christine, you talk about the school system. I want to talk a little in depth about the school system and what it does to help homelessness when it comes to children. We're going to talk about that when we come back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul.
Tammi Mac.
There's so many rewards in life. You coming into our home was one of the greatest rewards we could have ever had.
Spending time outdoors has never felt more valuable. Whether it's exploring nature or relaxing in your yard, let's do it responsibly. Before going out, check for closures and fire restrictions. Practice social distancing, even when outside and on the trail. Back at home, if burning yard debris, keep your pile small. And no matter where you are, be sure to properly extinguish any outdoor fire. Drown, stir, drown, feel. We're all in this together. Help keep our safe places safe.
Anytime they're playing music downstairs, it's loud. I go downstairs, see what they're doing, see what music they're doing, see what they're dancing to. I go play piano downstairs, they come get involved. Leah has a drum set beside it, banging that. Any music, that's what they do.
Social distancing. Staying 6 feet apart from others. A little thing that makes a big difference. Learn more now at coronavirusnow.com.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back. You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
Tammi Mac Show.
Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. So Christine was telling us about the school system and how you can identify kids who are homeless in school. But it made me think of COVID and how kids are being homeschooled today. So my question then becomes like, I don't have no kids, y'all. So this ain't never crossed my mind. But now that we're talking about child homelessness, I'm thinking, so if a child is homeless, not only do they not have a computer, but they don't have a home, which means that they're not being educated. So are there a slew of kids out here today in America that are not being educated for the last, 8-9 months?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And imagine they're going to fall more and more behind. I mean, for example, in Washington, D.C., there's a ward where only 42% of kids in non-COVID times graduate from high school. And from my standpoint, from the standpoint of health equity, if we were to get kids to graduate from high school, we would add 10 years of life. So kids falling behind, this is a crisis. It was already bad enough, but it's gotten even worse.
Betsy DeVos ain't doing nothing about this?
Really?
I mean, Betsy DeVos, she has no clue that there are kids who are homeless, who have no home that they can be homeschooled in. Betsy DeVos don't know. She don't know.
She doesn't care. I'll just break it down. Doesn't
you can
care.
know, but you don't.
She just cares about those lacrosse players who are being accused of rape on campuses so that they can, get off scot-free. Yep.
Wow is all I can say to that. So how do we rectify what you all say was a problem before COVID, but is going to get exponentially worse after COVID because there are, how do we even calculate that? Do we know how many kids are not going to school right now?
Well, there is some schooling happening, but it's very mediocre. So that's the context. So, okay. So homeless children in normal times, about 15% of them don't go to school. When I say normal, pre-COVID, right? And so what happened with COVID is that everybody had to stay home and we had to figure out how we continue learning in the home environment. So what's happening is that there is, in most households where, of the people we are talking about, very poor households or even homeless households, there is one device. Most of the times there's at least 2 or 3 children, including mom, who also is trying to do some work or find work or finish a course or whatever. Then, so we have an issue of having access to devices. We have an issue of connectivity because we need that internet. It's distance learning, right? So we need the connectivity. And a big problem that nobody really had thought about deeply was just a learning environment. like Dr. Gigi mentioned earlier, we are moving from apartments that used to be 3 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms to 1 bedroom for a family of 4 or 5. When you think about it, is there really space to study in an environment like that? Yeah. So even if you have that device and you are able to get that connectivity, which is in and out, because some of the cable companies were offering packages that allowed low-income families to have, 6 months of free connection, and then there would be something on the back end where you'd probably, at a low rate, have another 6 months. You still have that issue of overcrowding, where the kids actually don't have a space to learn. So it's a big challenge. And for homeless children, homeless providers like Upward Bound House have had to really pivot our work and move away from social services, pure social services, and focus on education. Because like Dr. Gigi said, literacy is a big problem also among our folks. There's just a lot of them that do not have high school level education. We're talking like most of the time.
I don't mean to cut you off, but are you saying that there is a place that children who are homeless can go to be educated?
So in Los Angeles County, the LA Unified School District, which is one of the biggest districts in the country, deployed a huge program of figuring out how kids can have those 3 things I just mentioned. And it's a combination of learning at home if you can. They've opened up, partnered with the city of Los Angeles, and they've opened up parks and recs, locations, and you have kids going to those locations. In some places, they have homeless families who are living in motels, and they've figured out how within the motel environment, they can create these like tent-like classrooms outside in the parking lot where you can at least do some learning. But the point is, it's not the same as the classroom, and we're still losing a lot of learning in that process.
Dr. Shauna, you're going to hate me for asking you this question, but what are the schools, or what do the schools do for homeless children? I mean, in and out of a COVID situation?
So I would
what
say,
part does the school system play in all of this?
The school system plays a huge part in this, in and out, and solving the problem. And like Christine said, even with the preventative, I mean, they knew this before COVID happened, and they ignored it. It just didn't do anything. Like she said, LAUSD is one of the biggest school districts. They get so much money for these kids. I mean, even with COVID, some of the other schools went in to get early permits to get their kids in, and they've got their kids back in school almost like nothing happened. So I think some of the things that the schools do is, one, just acknowledge that this really happens and identify these children, and then think about how they solve these things up front, because they have an opportunity now to think outside of the box. And when things become normalized again, what are some of the things that they can take care of that they knew were existing, but kind of turned a blind eye to?
Right.
Wow. And let's not forget about violence, gun violence here in DC. Kids may be studying, and the environment may include gun violence. So where is the child going to concentrate, whether homeless or in a home? So going back to the point that Dr. Charles made earlier about policy, I was on the group to reopen DC, the mayor's task force, safely in COVID, and we called for universal Wi-Fi that the city can provide, so that is something that's not a barrier. I mean, yes, there's still computer literacy and actually getting the devices, but in as much as you can reduce the barriers so that people can learn. One thing that's sort of, I feel like especially poor people always pay double and triple the price. You look at sort of rich upper middle class families, and they have the resources. They've got parents that are maybe educated. So when we were talking about how parents are now co-teaching. Well, what happens when the parents may not be able to read, or is not there because they've got one of 2 jobs? What happens to that teaching that goes on? Again, that's another thing that we have to take into consideration pre and post COVID.
Yeah. Does America, you ladies have been working with homelessness for quite some time, and you've talked to the people in positions to place policies. So I ask a simple question. Does America care?
No, not about Black people, not about people of color, not about poor people, not about the elderly, not about disabled. Look how COVID was handled. I mean, I call this a passive genocide that's happening. There was a calculation that there's a disproportionate number of people in those various groups that I just described. And it's like, who cares? I mean, you heard the administration saying that, well, older people, they're going to die anyway. So, I mean, you know, the proof is in the pudding. You can talk nice things, but sort of you have to show your behavior really has to reflect what your priorities are. So no, I don't think there's care.
To quote the lame duck president, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what though? This has given us an opportunity to care more about ourselves. And that is a learning to take away from what we have just experienced, that we do have a voice, that we can vote, that we can not just look at voting on a national level, but look at it on your local level, because that's where you feel it as an individual, right? And so I hope it was a reiteration or just that little light of fire where we have maybe got a little too comfortable to realize now that we have to take some of these things back into our own hand. We have to understand it because we can change these things, but we need it in the numbers. We need to understand what it is, and we need to be accountable and go out there and do the things we need to do to impact that policy and make those changes, because they need us to do that. And us meaning people, not just us meaning Black people. But they need
us meaning American citizens. Yes, all of us. We're going to talk about why the two largest cities in the nation are the most affected by homelessness when we return on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul.
You could be spreading the coronavirus without realizing you have it. So do your part and stay home. It's important to limit in-person interaction with anyone outside of your immediate household, but phone and video chat are safe ways to connect. It's also important to limit social gatherings. If you need essential items like food and medicine, try using a delivery service. If you must leave your house for essential items, or if you want to take a walk for exercise, make sure to wear a cloth face covering. Stay at least 6 feet away from other people. Try not to touch frequently touched surfaces like light signals, street signs, or benches. And wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds as often as possible. This advice applies to people of any age, including teens and younger adults. It takes all of us to slow the spread of the coronavirus, so stay home unless absolutely necessary. Visit coronavirus.gov for the latest information.
Those of you that have been following the brand for a long time, you know that we've been waiting to be on TV, and here we are.
Fox Soul presents Hollywood Unlocked Uncensored.
If there was 100 million right now, would you fight again? I can get 100 million easy. Got a light flex?
That was a hard flex.
It wasn't a hard flex, it was a real flex.
Every Friday.
I truly believe that you guys can go to the top.
Appreciate you.
I receive all of that because your energy is, yes, I receive
Stop
all
trying
of
to Floyd.
I'm not. I
Bye.
just like his energy. Hollywood Unlocked, what else can I say? You guys got the keys.
Back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. I want to get right into this because I want to get a little personal with you all in a few seconds here. But why is New York and LA amongst the cities with the most homeless population? Is it because the cities are so large?
Partly it's that, so it's just volume. But I think that the real big issue is the availability of housing and affordable housing, right? And the cost of housing and the gap between the wages and the housing costs. So when you're making, we've been advocating for 15 an hour for the last, 3-4 years. I think that we're going to get to 15, or we got to 15 this year, right? But like Dr. Charles pointed out, a one bedroom is $2,000 in Los Angeles. So $15 an hour, full-time job, do the math, you're still falling short, right? So what we are missing is really being able to catch up. The wages need to catch up to the housing costs. And then we need to build more affordable housing. We are building, you live in Los Angeles, we are building luxury housing. We are not building affordable housing.
Well, I do know the AIDS Healthcare Foundation has a division called Healthy Housing, and they offer housing opportunities for $500. All you have to do is show that you are capable of making $500 a month, and they will house you. And you don't have to have HIV or AIDS. You simply have to show that you can't afford housing. And they, I also believe, were a part, or actually formed the bill, the rent control bill in California that did not pass, mind you. did not pass. Yeah. I want to get a little personal with you all because I'm interested in knowing, Dr. Gigi, why do you commit to homelessness?
Well, I commit to social justice in healthcare. I mean, as a physician, we are supposed to try to heal. We're supposed to try to prevent illness and cure. And if we can't, we comfort. And so if you look at health in a holistic way, it is where we eat, what we eat, where we live, the air that we breathe. And so, in DC, one of the reasons that I started the Rodham Institute, which is dedicated to improving health equity in DC, I looked at Washington, DC, and do you realize that across the city, we have almost a 27-year gap in life expectancy? So if you live in the richest part of town, you can expect to live on average 94 years, and the poorest part, which is predominantly African-American, 66 and a half years. And that is, to me, inexcusable in the capital of arguably the richest nation in the world. We also have the highest per capita HIV, cancer mortality, and end-stage kidney disease. And finally, if you look at some specific areas in DC, our HIV rate is the same as Namibia. Our infant mortality rate is the same as Cambodia and El Salvador. That is inexcusable. And so if not me as an individual and as a physician to use my voice to call attention to people who can't and to clasp hands with all the wonderful people that are doing all this great work in these communities, then who?
It makes you wonder why they call us the greatest nation, huh?
Yeah.
When you start spewing those numbers, like really, and we're the greatest nation that exists. Dr. Shauna, why do you fight for the homeless?
I'm actually born and raised in New York. I come from a 2-parent household, upper middle class household. And I had a brother that was at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that had an adult onset of schizophrenia, who my father just couldn't deal with it, couldn't manage it. My brother ended up homeless. And, so I understand mental illness and I understand how that impacts homelessness. And even though it disproportionately affects African-Americans and the Black and the brown more, it has no barriers. It has absolutely no barriers. And because it affects us more and because it's very personal to me, that's why I fight for it. And that's why I believe it's very important. And just like Christine said, there just needs to be much more preventative care because, if we can get in front of it, doesn't mean we can stop it, but we can help slow it down.
Yeah. Christine, what touches you about the homeless that makes you want to put all your time into this?
So homelessness in general for me is in a country like the United States. So I'm born and raised in Kenya. So considered a third world country. And
let me ask you before you move on, I have to ask. So being from Kenya,
Yes.
But living in America,
yes,
one of the greatest cities in America, I might add, Los Angeles. Do you, no offense, Dr. Gigi, but do you consider America to be a great nation?
So yes and no. And the reason I say that is because, so my journey to America went through Europe. I went to school. I did all my college years in France. And it's very different. It's a developed country, what people here would call a socialist country, though it's not really a socialist country. But education is accessible to everybody. There's no Ivy League and, whatever. As a foreigner, I was able to go to the Sorbonne, which is, one of the oldest universities. But while I was there, I was in class with kids whose parents were farmers. It has nothing to do with this ethos that you work hard, you lift yourselves with your bootstraps, and you get there. So that, for me, is the difference. But I love the opportunities of America. I mean, today I am the executive director of a homeless organization in Los Angeles. That's America, right? So we have amazing possibilities. I think we are still shackled by our history, especially when it comes around social issues. Yeah. So, to the point, do we care? The government cares, but we need to care more. And for me, family homelessness was really personal, just because I don't think a child chooses their parents, they don't choose their country, and they certainly don't choose their socioeconomic situation, right? And with all the effects that homelessness has on children, I just think it's morally corrupt, it's morally bankrupt to have children live in a car. It's just, you just don't do that. Even in third world countries, they don't do that. So for me, that's the reason.
Wow, to hear you say even in third world countries, they don't do that. And it takes me right back to, then why does everyone think we're the great nation? If even in third world countries, they don't have children living in cars. We see it pretty frequently in America.
Yeah, I think that idea that we're the biggest and the best country in the world was true after World War II. And it really was a mobilizing message to get us all in there after World War II. We rebuilt the nation. We had social programs. We had a strong defense. We had won the war. That was the message. And I think it carried us on for a few decades. But the truth of the matter is that we've been slipping. If you look at high school graduations in countries that are so-called developed, we are behind. If you look at healthcare, we are behind. If you look at lifespan, how long people get to live, we are behind. So there are many indicators that show that we are not the biggest and the best anymore, but it's a narrative that's still kind of a fantasy that we still kind of have.
I call it living the Hollywood dream, baby, living the Hollywood dream. When I got to Hollywood, I was totally dismayed that not even the Hollywood sign itself lit up. It was like, okay, I am now looking at the man behind the curtain, and it's a lot of smoke and mirrors here, but we still live here and we still love this country, and we will still be right back to talk about the solutions and how we can help our country become better when it comes to the homeless on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul.
Tammi Mac.
1 in 3 adults has pre-diabetes. That means it could be you, your favorite brother, your other brother, you, your football buddy, your football buddy, you, your plumber.
Breathe right into your foot.
Your plumber's masseuse.
Yes.
You, your dog walker, your cat jogger. With early diagnosis, pre-diabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Meet the Scan, a simple procedure whose mission is to detect lung cancer early.
I'm here to save you.
Oh.
But I feel fine.
That's great, but you may still be at high risk for lung cancer.
Oh man, that's a new fence.
If you smoke, early detection could save your life. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
It is the Queen's Happy Hour, filled with a little messiness.
Cocktails with the Queens, hosted by Claudia Jordan.
Some talk shows just want to talk about, gossip, and that's cool. There's no shade. There's nothing wrong with that. But, I like that we get into the politics, and so much so that Lisa Ray's hair is red, white, and blue.
Sip and serve every Monday night.
We got some questions for you about some other stuff in a little bit, Lisa Ray. No, I want to know,
Uh-oh, she's out.
It's all good. It's all good.
We're all just trying to keep things running for those who rely on us. That's why we don't have time to be sick with the flu.
We don't have time for delays.
Ready!
We don't have time for spills. Next.
We don't have time for setbacks. Let's be real.
Getting the flu shot
helps you fight the flu.
Get a flu shot for yourself and those around you too.
Tammi Mac Show.
Back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul, where we are tackling homelessness today, and particularly child homelessness. Okay, so I want to ask just a simple personal question for myself. If I'm driving down the street and I see someone homeless, what can I do in that moment? Or what should I do in that moment?
I asked that question to one of my patients. Because sometimes it's confusing, people look away, they don't know to give money. And so what he said is buy food, because a lot of people can't eat. And one thing that I learned about mental health is the strongest social determinant of mental health is food. Food correlates with the severity of mental illness. So if you can, actually purchase the food, that would be the best thing. Just to say good morning, to just acknowledge that this is a human being. If you don't have time to get some food, I think that is so important. I see you. I see you. I see you, and I care about you.
Full disclosure here. I was eating at Red Lobster. It's one of my favorite fast food chains because it's nostalgic, not because it's great tasting food. But I was eating at Red Lobster, and them Cheddar Bay biscuits is off the chain. But anyway, I was eating at Red Lobster, and a lady asked me for some food when I came out, and so I had ordered an additional, to go. So I gave her my to go, and I drove away, and she threw it on the ground, and I backed up, and I said, "Did you just throw my shit on the ground?" So I don't know if me giving food is the best thing, because I was outside of myself. I'm sorry, Dr. Gigi, I was outside of myself. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I said, "You just threw," and she said to me, "I don't eat seafood."
Well, so here's something, okay? Because we don't think about homeless people having a choice. So if you can ask, what do you want? I mean, first of all, I think that's the exception. I think most people would not do that. And they would even share, even if they didn't like seafood, that they could give to somebody else. But ask. I had something similar where as I was walking into a grocery store, somebody said, I said, "What would you like?" It was a very hot day. And they said, "I want a strawberry soda." So I came out, there was no strawberry soda. I brought him an orange soda and some Pepperidge Farm goldfish. And he said, "I don't like this." And I thought, well, that's his right to refuse. I mean, who says just because you're homeless that you can just eat whatever? So
that's a great, you know what? That right there was worth I needed that.
I think another thing is not to judge.
That is what we think. And we talk about white privilege all the time, but that is having a home privilege. You know what I'm saying? Like that's a privilege in itself to be able to say to somebody else, you're homeless. You don't get to choose what you like and what you don't like. That's a very unfair statement to make. So I correct myself. I stand corrected today. And thank you for that. You're right. They get to choose, even though they're homeless. I feel bad now.
I was saying, I think another thing is not to judge. Do not immediately judge. What I do is when I see someone, I usually say, that's someone's brother, that's someone's mother, that's someone's sister. Somebody loves that person, because that's generally the truth. That person has a family and people who love them, which then can tone down the judgment. We tend to be, as Americans, very entitled and a little judgy. So if you can take that judgment away and just realize that that is a human being and how they stand and who they are, you can maybe approach it a little bit different and maybe not take it as personal. Even if they do throw the food on the
it was my dinner for later on that day. I took it even though I could afford to go and get another one, I took that personal. Did she just throw my shrimp on the ground?
Yeah, but yes, I think the power of choice.
And I think now what I will do is say, what would you like? I will say that. I will say that. So thank you for that. What can we do as a society? What are the solutions to this problem?
So, I mean, first, to double back on that other conversation, most homeless people, when you ask them, what makes you feel like what's the worst experience about being homeless? They'll tell you is being dehumanized, is people not making eye contact, people sometimes stepping on you when they're crossing the street, people crossing the street 100 feet away just so that they don't see you or so. To your point, what do? Acknowledge them. Even just the eye contact is so important, and I can't stress that enough. In terms of what we can do, we talked earlier about prevention. Which is basically, let's go upstream and detect and determine those folks who are most vulnerable to being homeless, and then close the front door to homelessness. I think housing is also a very big deal. We need to build housing that people can afford. And when we talk about people, we're talking about working class people. We're talking about people on minimum wage, people making less than $20 an hour, people making $25 an hour, and on and on and on. So we absolutely need to build more housing that's affordable, that's around transit areas. There's things that make sense that everybody else has done. We are not recreating the wheel here. Most of these solutions have been tried and they've worked.
Dr. Shauna, tell us about the Information Exchange Group.
So I started the Information Exchange Group as a nonprofit organization because access and information and knowledge to me is key. If you don't know, then you can't have access to it. And I find that a lot of times information is not cascaded down. People know, but they either tend not to share because they want to make sure they get their portion or their share of it first. And so I developed that to be able to cascade the information up and down and throughout. And that way everyone has an opportunity if they know, and they have the right to decide if they want to do something with that information.
And Christine, tell us about Upward Bound House.
So we are a nonprofit based here in Los Angeles. We've been around for about 30 years. And our goal is to end family homelessness. And we want to do that by providing temporary housing, meaning that immediately people are homeless, you can find a place to stay, provide services that people need to be able to lift themselves up and get back on their feet and continue their lives. And the last piece is to really advocate for poor folks because they don't have a voice. They can afford lobbyists. They're not sitting around those policy tables. And so we find that our work has to include advocacy. And so that's what we do. Our ultimate goal is to put every family that we help in permanent housing and support them so that they can live as independently as possible.
Excellent. Dr. Gigi, the Rodham Institute.
Thank you. The Rodham Institute is dedicated to improving health equity in DC, but one of the things that we have the honor and the privilege to do is work with amazing partners. So the Covenant House is focused on youth homelessness, and there are specific groups that are at increased risk. These are kids that may have had physical abuse, sexual abuse, that they were in the sex trafficking, LGBTQ kids, and Covenant House helps to give them a place, not only a place where they can detox if they have substance abuse problems, but also to learn how to read and to help them get into jobs. And I just want to give a shout out to the faith-based community, because so many churches and so many other houses of worship do such tremendous work. So there are good people that are doing work. We just need to support them, change the policies, get more money to these systems that are trying to do their best to help children and families.
Well, I thank you all for doing your best to help, because I do believe that your work matters. So Dr. Shauna, thank you for joining me, Dr. Gigi and Christine. That's your Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. And until tomorrow, it's truly a blessing to be in your box. Bye, y'all.